My parents asked me to raise my younger brother's little boy after his wife died because they said I was the only person the child trusted. I spent 7 years loving him like my own son, missing promotions, turning down relationships, and building my entire life around him. Then my brother remarried, walked into my house with our parents, and told me I was no longer family. 3 weeks later, someone knocked on my door carrying papers that changed everything. My name is Nathan Mercer, and I'm 34 years old. 7 years ago, my younger brother, Caleb, lost his wife in a terrible car accident. Their son, Liam, had just turned 3. My parents begged me to help because Caleb had fallen into severe depression and couldn't care for his own child. They promised it would only be temporary until my brother recovered and found his footing again. Temporary slowly became permanent. Weeks turned into months, and months became years. Liam moved into my home, attended preschool near my apartment, and eventually started elementary school. I learned how to braid shoelaces, help with homework, and comfort nightmares. Somewhere along the way, he stopped calling me Uncle Nathan and quietly started calling me Dad. At first, Caleb visited every weekend. Then the visits became twice a month, then once a month, and eventually only on birthdays or holidays. Every excuse sounded believable. He was working overtime, seeing a therapist, rebuilding his life, or simply wasn't ready emotionally. I believed him because I wanted Liam to have hope that his father still cared. My parents constantly praised me for stepping up when nobody else could. Every family gathering included speeches about how proud they were of my sacrifice. They promised Liam would always know how much I loved him and assured me that nobody would ever forget everything I had done. Looking back, those promises feel painfully ironic now. Raising Liam changed every part of my life. I declined promotions that required relocating because I refused to move him away from his school and friends. I ended 2 serious relationships after my girlfriends admitted they weren't ready to raise someone else's child. None of those decisions felt like sacrifices because Liam had become my entire world. When Liam turned 10, Caleb announced he was getting married again. His fiancée, Vanessa, seemed kind and welcomed Liam warmly during family dinners. I was genuinely happy for my brother because I believed he had finally healed enough to become the father his son deserved. I never imagined their wedding would become the beginning of my worst nightmare. A month after the wedding, Caleb called and asked if he could stop by my house to discuss something important. He sounded unusually confident, almost rehearsed. When the doorbell rang that evening, he wasn't alone. Vanessa stood beside him, and behind them were my mother and father. The serious expressions on their faces immediately made me nervous. Caleb smiled before saying he was finally ready to take Liam home. He explained that Vanessa wanted them to become a real family and believed it was time for her stepson to live with them permanently. My parents nodded proudly, saying this was exactly what everyone had prayed for during the past 7 years. Before I could respond, Liam walked into the living room carrying his backpack after soccer practice. Caleb knelt down and cheerfully announced that he was coming home with his real family. Liam froze. Instead of smiling, he looked at me with tears filling his eyes. Then he quietly whispered words that left the entire room speechless. "I don't want to leave, Dad," Liam said, pointing directly at me. Caleb's smile disappeared instantly. Vanessa looked uncomfortable, while my parents quickly insisted Liam was simply confused because he had spent too much time away from his biological father. But Liam repeated himself louder this time, refusing to move away from my side. Caleb suddenly became angry. He accused me of turning his own son against him by allowing Liam to call me Dad. I calmly reminded him that I had corrected Liam for years, but children eventually decide for themselves who earns that title. Caleb didn't answer. Instead, he blamed me for replacing him while he struggled through the hardest years of his life. My mother stepped between us and said something that hurt more than anything Caleb had shouted. She claimed I should be grateful for the years I was allowed to spend with Liam because he had never truly been my child. According to her, my role was finished now, and it was time to step aside without making things difficult. Liam ran upstairs crying and locked himself inside his bedroom. Nobody followed him except me. Through the door, he begged me not to make him leave. I promised I wouldn't force him to do anything that night. When I returned downstairs, Caleb informed me that he had already contacted a lawyer and expected Liam to move out within the week. As they prepared to leave, Vanessa quietly stayed behind for a moment. She looked nervous before slipping a folded envelope into my hand. "Don't tell Caleb I gave you this," she whispered. "You deserve to know what they're really planning." The moment their car disappeared down the street, I opened the envelope, and my heart nearly stopped. Inside the envelope was a copy of a legal consultation Caleb had printed a few days earlier. One sentence was highlighted in yellow. The attorney advised that if Liam continued living with me much longer, a judge might consider the emotional bond between us when deciding custody. Caleb had written one note in the margin: "Move him immediately before it's too late." I barely slept that night. The next morning, I contacted a respected family lawyer and showed him everything. After reading the document, he leaned back and asked one question: "Have you been Liam's primary caregiver for all these years?" When I answered yes, he immediately requested every record proving I had raised him since he was 3. Fortunately, I had kept everything without realizing how important it might become. School enrollment forms listed me as Liam's emergency contact. Medical records showed I attended every appointment. Teachers emailed me about grades and behavior. Soccer coaches called me first after every game. Every document quietly told the same story without needing a single explanation. My lawyer smiled as he organized the paperwork into separate folders. He explained that biology mattered, but judges also considered stability, emotional attachment, and the child's best interests. 7 years wasn't a weekend visit. It was nearly Liam's entire childhood. Suddenly, I realized this situation wasn't as hopeless as I had feared. 2 days later, Caleb officially filed paperwork demanding immediate custody. He argued that he had recovered emotionally, remarried, and could finally provide the stable home Liam deserved. Reading those words hurt because they ignored every birthday, every school event, every fever, and every bedtime story he had chosen to miss. Liam noticed something was wrong even though I tried hiding the court papers. One evening, he quietly asked whether he had done something bad. I hugged him and promised none of this was his fault. Then he asked the question I couldn't answer. "If they win, do I have to stop calling you Dad?" The first court hearing lasted less than 30 minutes. The judge refused to make an immediate decision and instead appointed an independent child psychologist to interview Liam. Both sides would also undergo home evaluations before any custody ruling. Caleb looked confident leaving the courtroom. My lawyer looked even more confident than he did. A week later, the psychologist spent nearly 3 hours speaking with Liam alone. Afterward, she privately interviewed me about our daily routines, family traditions, homework schedules, and future plans. Caleb later complained that the process was unfair because too much attention focused on the past instead of his current situation. During Caleb's home evaluation, Liam visited for the afternoon. Vanessa tried decorating a bedroom just for him, buying expensive furniture and new video games. Liam thanked her politely, but barely touched anything. When the evaluator asked where he felt most comfortable, he quietly answered, "Home." Then he pointed toward my house instead. 3 days before the final custody hearing, my lawyer received the psychologist's official report. He called me immediately and asked me to come to his office instead of discussing it over the phone. As I entered the conference room, he slid the report across the table. The very first recommendation changed everything. The psychologist concluded that removing Liam from my home against his wishes could cause serious emotional harm. She wrote that I had become his psychological parent through years of daily care, consistency, and unconditional support. Although Caleb was his biological father, she recommended a gradual transition only if Liam genuinely wanted one. My lawyer quietly smiled before closing the report. Caleb exploded when he learned about the recommendation. He accused the psychologist of being biased and claimed I had manipulated Liam for years. His attorney requested another evaluation, but the judge denied it after reviewing the evidence. 7 years of school records, medical files, and witness statements carried far more weight than accusations without proof. My parents doubled down instead of admitting their mistakes. They called relatives, insisting I was trying to steal a child who had never belonged to me. For several days, my phone filled with angry messages from family members who only knew Caleb's version of the story. None of them had ever asked who tucked Liam into bed every night. Then something unexpected happened. Liam's fourth-grade teacher voluntarily testified. She explained that throughout the years, I had attended every parent conference, every school performance, and every emergency meeting. She admitted she had always believed I was Liam's father because nobody else had ever appeared in that role. The final witness surprised everyone. Vanessa asked to speak directly to the judge. Caleb looked completely shocked as she calmly admitted she had encouraged him to reconnect with Liam, but never expected him to erase 7 years of love overnight. Then she revealed something Caleb had desperately hoped nobody would ever hear. Vanessa admitted that Caleb never planned to rebuild a relationship with Liam slowly. A week before the custody hearing, he privately told her it would be easier to start over if Liam stopped calling me dad immediately. He believed forcing enough distance between us would solve the problem. Instead, it only pushed Liam further away from him. The courtroom became completely silent. Caleb denied every word, accusing Vanessa of betraying him because their marriage had recently become strained. She calmly handed the judge several text messages. In them, Caleb repeatedly complained that keeping me involved would only confuse Liam and damage his chances of becoming the child's only father again. After reviewing the messages, the judge requested a short recess. My lawyer quietly explained that Vanessa's testimony changed the entire case. The issue was no longer whether Caleb loved his son. It was whether he was willing to place Liam's emotional well-being above his own pride. That distinction mattered far more than anyone expected. When the hearing resumed, the judge surprised everyone by asking Liam whether he wished to speak. Nobody pressured him. The judge made it clear he could refuse without consequences. Liam looked around the courtroom before taking a deep breath. Then he quietly walked toward the witness chair without looking back. Liam didn't cry. He simply explained what life had looked like since he was 3 years old. I packed his lunches, helped with homework, stayed awake during fevers, attended every birthday, and never missed a soccer game. Then he looked directly at Caleb and softly asked, "Why do you only want me now?" Caleb tried answering, but no words came out. For several seconds, he simply stared at the floor. Finally, he admitted he believed there would always be more time. First, he needed to heal. Then he needed to rebuild his career. Then he wanted to remarry. Before he realized it, 7 years had disappeared. The judge thanked Liam for his honesty before ending the hearing. Instead of announcing a decision immediately, she said she needed several days to review every document and testimony carefully. Those 3 days felt longer than the previous 7 years. None of us knew what our future would look like. During that waiting period, something unexpected happened. My parents visited my house without Caleb. They looked exhausted. My mother admitted she hadn't slept since hearing Liam's testimony. She quietly confessed they had spent years convincing themselves they were protecting Caleb when, in reality, they had slowly abandoned their grandson's emotional needs. My father apologized for asking me to step aside so easily. He admitted he had always believed blood alone determined who a real parent was. Watching Liam beg to stay with me forced him to accept something painful. Parenting isn't proven by biology. It's proven by showing up every single day, especially when it's difficult. A week later, the courtroom filled once again. Everyone stood as the judge entered carrying a thick folder. She began reading her decision slowly, explaining that this case wasn't about punishing Caleb or rewarding me. It was about protecting the emotional stability of a child who had already experienced enormous loss. The judge ruled that Liam would continue living with me as his primary guardian. Caleb would receive regular parenting time, but any future changes would happen gradually, and only if Liam felt comfortable. The court refused to remove him from the only stable home he had known for nearly his entire life. Caleb closed his eyes after hearing the decision. For a moment, I expected another angry outburst. Instead, he quietly nodded. When the hearing ended, he approached me outside the courthouse and admitted he had spent years expecting to reclaim fatherhood simply because he shared Liam's last name. Reality had taught him otherwise. Over the following months, Caleb began visiting consistently instead of making promises he couldn't keep. He attended soccer games, helped with homework, and slowly earned Liam's trust one afternoon at a time. Nobody forced a relationship between them anymore. They built one naturally, exactly the way it should have happened years earlier. Vanessa remained patient through the entire process. She never asked Liam to call her mom or pressured him into feeling comfortable before he was ready. Instead, she treated him with kindness and respected every boundary. Watching her made me realize she had never been the problem. She had tried to do the right thing from the beginning. Nearly a year later, Liam surprised all of us during his school's Family Day celebration. When his teacher asked him to introduce the people he considered his family, he smiled proudly before saying, "I have two dads. One gave me life, the other taught me how to live it." The entire room fell silent. Family Day changed something inside Caleb. Instead of competing with me, he finally accepted that Liam's love wasn't something either of us had to win. A child could love more than one parent without betraying the other. That realization allowed him to stop chasing the title of dad and start becoming one through his actions. For the first time in years, Caleb asked me for advice instead of arguing with me. He wanted to know Liam's favorite meals, bedtime routine, and the little habits that made him feel safe after difficult days. I answered every question honestly because helping Liam mattered far more than proving I had been right. As months passed, Liam slowly became more comfortable spending weekends with Caleb and Vanessa. Nobody forced hugs or emotional conversations anymore. They simply cooked dinner together, played board games, and watched movies. The pressure disappeared, and with it, so did much of Liam's fear. Trust finally had room to grow naturally. My parents also worked hard to repair the damage they had caused. They apologized directly to Liam for making him feel like he had no choice. Instead of asking for forgiveness, they accepted that rebuilding his trust would take time. Every visit became less about words and more about consistently showing they had changed. One afternoon, Caleb invited me to lunch without telling anyone else. He admitted something he had never confessed before. After his wife's death, every time he looked at Liam, he was reminded of everything he had lost. Running away felt easier than facing that pain. By the time he was ready, he no longer knew how to come back. I didn't excuse his choices, but I finally understood them. Grief explains many decisions, even terrible ones, though it never erases responsibility. Caleb admitted he should have asked for help instead of disappearing. If he had stayed involved from the beginning, none of us would have ended up fighting each other inside a courtroom. Liam continued calling me Dad, and surprisingly, Caleb stopped trying to change that. One evening, he quietly told me, "You earned that name long before I deserved it." Hearing those words meant more than winning any custody case ever could. They weren't spoken out of defeat. They came from genuine honesty. A year later, Liam's school assigned a family history project. Instead of drawing a traditional family tree, he created something different. He placed himself in the center and connected everyone with lines labeled, "Helped me grow." My parents, Caleb, Vanessa, and I were all included. His teacher later said it was the most thoughtful project she had ever seen. When the project was displayed during the school exhibition, several parents asked Liam why he had two fathers on the poster. He smiled without hesitation. Because one stayed when he didn't have to, and the other came back when he finally learned how. Even the teachers struggled to hide their emotions after hearing that answer. Months later, my lawyer called with unexpected news. Since the custody case had ended successfully, he wanted to return several boxes of documents collected during the trial. As we sorted through them, he found one sealed envelope that had never been opened. It had been submitted anonymously just before the final hearing. Inside the envelope were dozens of handwritten notes Liam had written over several years but never mailed. Most were addressed to Caleb. They described soccer games, birthdays, school awards, and ordinary days he wished his father had shared with him. Reading them made all of us realize just how deeply Liam had missed him. Caleb read every letter alone that evening. The next morning, he came to my house with tears in his eyes. He admitted those pages hurt more than losing the custody case because they showed exactly how many moments he could never get back. No apology would ever replace those missing years. Instead of dwelling on regret forever, Caleb asked Liam whether they could create new memories together. They began taking one fishing trip every month, no matter how busy life became. It wasn't an attempt to erase the past. It was a promise that the future would look different from everything that came before. Watching them slowly rebuild their relationship became one of the happiest surprises of my life. I had never wanted Liam to lose his father. I only wanted him to keep the stability he deserved. Now, for the first time, he didn't have to choose between us. He simply had more people who truly loved him. 2 years after the trial, my parents organized a family dinner to celebrate Liam's birthday. As everyone gathered around the table laughing together, my father quietly stood and raised his glass. "For years," he said, "we believed family was decided by blood. Liam taught us it's decided by the people who stay when staying is hardest." After dinner, Liam surprised everyone by asking if we could take one family photo together. Instead of standing between Caleb and me, he grabbed both of our hands and pulled us beside him. "Now nobody has to stand on opposite sides anymore," he said with a grin. It was the first photograph in years where nobody was pretending to be happy. We actually were. As life settled into a new routine, Caleb never missed another important moment. He attended every soccer tournament, every parent meeting, and every birthday. Sometimes he called me afterward just to ask whether he had handled something correctly. The man who once believed fatherhood came automatically now understood it had to be earned every single day. My own life slowly began changing as well. For years, I had built every decision around raising Liam. Now that he spent more time with Caleb too, I finally accepted a promotion I had postponed several times. It allowed me to expand my career without sacrificing the relationship that mattered most to me. Not long afterward, I met someone named Claire during a charity event supporting foster children. She listened patiently as I explained my unusual family situation. Instead of feeling intimidated, she smiled and said, "The people who choose to love children they don't have to are usually the ones with the biggest hearts." Several months later, Claire met Liam for the first time. I worried he might feel uncomfortable, but he welcomed her immediately. On the drive home, he quietly asked whether she made me happy. When I answered yes, he simply smiled and said, "Then I hope she stays." His approval meant more to me than anything else. Even my parents noticed how different our family had become. They often admitted they had nearly destroyed something beautiful by trying to force everyone into the roles they thought were correct. Accepting reality instead of controlling it had finally allowed every relationship to grow in its own way. One afternoon, Caleb invited me to Liam's school baseball game. As we watched from the bleachers, another parent asked whether we were brothers. Caleb smiled before answering, "Yes, and he's the reason my son had a father when I couldn't be one." I looked away because I didn't want him to see my eyes filling with tears. When Liam turned 13, he asked if we could visit his mother's grave together. The four of us, Caleb, Vanessa, Liam, and I, stood quietly with fresh flowers. Liam thanked his mother for giving him life before looking at both of us and saying he thought she would be happy knowing he had never been alone. Driving home that afternoon, Caleb admitted something he had carried for years. He believed his late wife would have hated him for disappearing after her death. I reminded him she probably would have hated him for giving up forever, but she would have been proud that he eventually found the courage to come back. A few months later, Claire and I became engaged. Before I could even ask, Liam volunteered to carry the rings during the ceremony. Caleb smiled and told him it was a perfect job because he had always been the person who held our family together, even when the adults forgot how. At the wedding reception, my father stood to make a short speech. Years earlier, he believed I should simply step aside because I wasn't Liam's biological parent. Now he publicly admitted that those had been the biggest mistakes of his life. Love, he finally understood, is measured by commitment, not genetics. After the ceremony, Liam handed me a folded card he had written himself. Inside, he thanked me for never leaving, even when everyone else expected me to. At the bottom, he had crossed out the word uncle and carefully written dad. I quietly folded the card and slipped it into my jacket pocket. That card now sits framed on the shelf in my office. Whenever work becomes stressful or life feels overwhelming, I look at those few handwritten words and remember that the most important achievements in life are rarely measured by promotions, money, or success. They're measured by the lives we help shape through love and consistency. People sometimes ask whether I won the custody case. I always tell them the court case was never the real victory. The real victory was watching Liam grow up surrounded by people who finally learned to put his happiness above their own pride. That was something no judge could ever order. If this story taught me anything, it's that being a parent isn't about who was there on the day a child was born. It's about who stays through the ordinary days that follow, the scraped knees, sleepless nights, school projects, fears, dreams, and quiet moments that slowly build a lifetime of trust. In the end, love isn't inherited, it's earned.